Okay, let's unpack this. In the vast tapestry of modern history, few events are as brief yet as profoundly impactful as the Six-Day War. Just 6 days, right? June 1967. But its echoes, well, they resonate through headlines and international relations even today. It really continues to shape diplomatic efforts and human lives across a critical region of the world. Our deep dive today is custom tailored for you, aimed at cutting through the noise and understanding not just what happened in those pivotal 6 days, but why it mattered so much. How it fundamentally reshaped the Middle East and why it became such a defining turning point. To help us navigate this incredibly complex period, we've taken, well, a stack of sources, everything from meticulous historical accounts, geopolitical analyses, to direct narratives and firsthand perspectives. Our mission is really to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight, giving you a clear, concise, and hopefully captivating understanding of this transformative conflict. We'll explore the complex web of events leading up to it, the intense 6 days themselves, and critically, the enduring legacy that continues to define the region. So, to begin, what exactly was the Six-Day War about? I mean, it certainly wasn't a sudden explosion, was it?
No, not at all. That's a really important point. The Six-Day War was less an isolated incident and much more the culmination of years of escalating friction. It was, in fact, the third major Arab-Israeli war since the establishment of the State of Israel back in 1948. So rather than being about a single isolated dispute, it was really a boiling over of these deeply entrenched, long-standing tensions that had been steadily building, kind of like a pressure cooker, reaching a really dangerous crescendo.
Right, a pressure cooker. So, can you paint a picture of that pre-war environment? What made it so volatile?
Absolutely. The pre-war environment was incredibly volatile. It was marked by a significant increase in cross-border aggression. Prior to 67, there was a noticeable rise in attacks carried out against Israel by Palestinian guerrilla groups. These were sort of nascent groups, often operating from bases in Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. They engaged in various forms of infiltration and sabotage, planting mines, conducting raids, things like that, basically creating a sense of insecurity along Israel's borders.
And these weren't just random acts, you're saying?
No, exactly. They formed a persistent pattern of violence. And the sources are clear on this. These actions directly led to what were termed costly Israeli reprisals. So this dangerous cycle, right? Palestinian attacks provoke strong Israeli military responses.
Which then fuels more anger and desire for retribution on the Arab side.
Precisely. It pushed the whole region ever closer to the brink of a wider conflict. A really vicious cycle.
So these retaliatory actions weren't just symbolic gestures. They had real, often devastating consequences. Can you give us a specific example, something that illustrates the scale we're talking about?
Yes, absolutely. A particularly stark example comes from November 1966. Following the series of these cross-border incidents, Israeli forces launched a significant retaliatory strike. It was aimed at the Jordanian-controlled village of Al-Samu in the West Bank.
Okay.
The operation was officially targeting suspected Palestinian guerrilla bases, but, well, the impact on the civilian population was severe. The sources detail 18 people killed and 54 wounded, and many homes destroyed.
Wow, that's substantial.
It was. And the international community, including the UN, widely condemned this large-scale Israeli action. They highlighted the heavy civilian casualties, its sort of disproportionate nature. But the key thing is, this strike didn't de-escalate things at all. Quite the opposite. It intensified anger in Jordan and really across the Arab world. It amplified calls for stronger Arab unity and a more forceful response to what they saw as Israeli aggression.
So it just fed back into that cycle you mentioned.
Exactly. And then, fast forward a few months to April 1967, and the tensions reached a new level. It actually spilled over into direct military confrontation, but this time in the air. The Israeli Air Force engaged Syrian MiG fighter jets in a fierce aerial battle over the Golan Heights.
A direct state-on-state clash.
Right. And in that confrontation, the Israeli Air Force shot down 6 Syrian MiGs. This was a critical development because, as you said, it moved the conflict beyond ground incursions and retaliatory raids into these direct military clashes. It demonstrated a significant escalation in the scope, the intensity of the hostilities. It really signaled that this simmering conflict could erupt into a full-scale war at basically any moment.
And amidst all this rising tension, especially between Israel and Syria, something else happened that acted like pouring fuel on the fire, didn't it? The Soviet intelligence reports.
Ah, yes. That's a fascinating piece of the puzzle. What's truly striking here is how even inaccurate information, and these reports were inaccurate, became such a powerful accelerant in this already highly charged environment. In May 1967, these Soviet intelligence reports emerged. They indicated, incorrectly as it turned out, that Israel was massing troops and planning a full-scale military campaign against Syria, maybe even to overthrow its government.
But they weren't true.
Later proven not to be true on that scale, no. But that almost didn't matter at the time. This episode really reveals a profound fragility, in how societies react under pressure, something we still see today. Regardless of the truth, the psychological impact of those reports on the Arab states was immense.
So they believed it.
They certainly acted as if they did. It fueled this perception of an imminent threat, a sense of an impending attack that resonated deeply with all the pre-existing fears and historical grievances. The Soviet Union, while they were likely seeking to bolster their allies, maybe gain influence, they might have intended these reports to prompt Arab unity, but they had the unintended consequence of pushing the region much closer to war.
And communication wasn't instant back then, was it? Verifying information would have been harder.
Exactly. In a time when verified information might not travel quickly or be easily accessible, these fears just got amplified. It almost created a self-fulfilling prophecy. Readers felt compelled to react to what they believed was happening, not necessarily what was actually verifiable. And this miscalculation, fundamentally based on false intelligence, became a really significant driver toward confrontation.
The stage was well and truly set for a flashpoint then. And here's where it gets, as you say, really interesting. With tensions already sky high, President Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt. He made a series of moves. Calculated perhaps, but incredibly risky. Moves that drastically escalated the situation and, well, seemed to have directly led to war. It sounds like he was under immense pressure himself.
Oh, profoundly so. You have to remember, Nasser at the time was this towering figure in the Arab world, a real champion of pan-Arab nationalism. However, he faced sharp criticism from various Arab quarters, including rivals, for what was seen as his inaction. His failure, they said, to aid Syria and Jordan against Israeli reprisals like the Al-Sama raid.
So he was being accused of hiding behind his rhetoric.
To some extent, yes. Critics argued that despite his strong words, he appeared to be, well, hiding behind the United Nations emergency force, the UNEF. UNEF had been stationed at Egypt's border with Israel in the Sinai since the 1956 Suez Crisis, acting as a buffer.
So there was political pressure on him to act.
Immense pressure. From a political standpoint, Nasser felt compelled to demonstrate Arab unity and strength, to reassert Egypt's role as the leader of the Arab world, and crucially, to show unwavering support for Syria, which felt threatened. His actions were a clear signal, not just to Israel, but also to his Arab allies and his own people, that Egypt was prepared to lead, prepared to confront Israel.
Let's walk through the chronology of these critical steps he took, because each one seems to have just piled onto the tension, pushing things further towards the brink.
Precisely. It's a rapid sequence. On May 14, 1967, Nasser began mobilizing Egyptian forces in the Sinai Peninsula. We're talking thousands of troops, hundreds of tanks, moving towards the Israeli border. This wasn't some quiet, subtle deployment either. It was highly visible, a very clear strategic move that immediately signaled an increased military threat to Israel and sent shockwaves across the region.
Just putting the pieces in place, quite literally.
Exactly. Then, just 4 days later, on May 18th, Nasser took the really extraordinary step of formally requesting the removal of that UNEF force stationed in the Sinai.
The UN buffer force.
Yes, UNEF had served as this crucial buffer zone, a neutral barrier between Egyptian and Israeli forces, and it had largely prevented direct confrontation for over a decade. So its removal wasn't just a powerful symbolic act of defiance, signaling Egypt's intent to take matters into its own hands.
It was also practical. It removed the buffer.
Right. It was a practical removal of a key de-escalation mechanism. It brought the two armies into direct physical contact along the border. This single decision dramatically raised the probability of military conflict.
Okay, mobilization, removal of the UN buffer, and then came what many consider the most provocative act of all.
Indeed. Many historians point to this next step. The most provocative move came on May 22nd. Nasser announced the closure of the Strait of Tiran to all Israeli shipping. Now, this act effectively imposed a blockade on Eilat, which is Israel's only port on the Red Sea, down in the Gulf of Aqaba.
And this wasn't just symbolic, was it? This had real economic impact.
Huge impact. It wasn't merely a diplomatic slight. It was effectively economic strangulation. Eilat was vital for Israel's trade, especially with Asia and Africa. Critically, a lot of Israel's oil imports came through this waterway. In international law, a blockade of a nation's port is widely considered a casus belli.
An act of war.
An act of war. It placed Israel under immense economic and strategic pressure. It made it clear that a military response was not just possible, but likely. For Israel, this was perceived as an existential threat, a deliberate attempt to cripple its economy and isolate it completely.
So Nasser's moves weren't happening in a vacuum. How did the rest of the Arab world react? Did this solidify things?
It absolutely did. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Nasser's bold and frankly risky actions triggered a powerful domino effect across the Arab world. It solidified what appeared to be an overwhelming unified front against Israel. On May 30th, amidst this escalating crisis, King Hussein of Jordan did something quite unexpected. He flew to Cairo and signed a mutual defense pact with Egypt.
Jordan joined in, despite Israel's warnings earlier.
Yes. This agreement formally placed Jordanian forces, and remember, they had a significant ground presence along Israel's longest border, the West Bank border, under Egyptian command. This was a massive step towards a unified military front. And then, shortly after that, Iraq also joined this burgeoning alliance.
So Israel is now facing Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq.
Exactly. It further enhanced the perceived encirclement of Israel. This solidified Arab alliance signaled a truly unified military threat. For Israel, the situation now looked absolutely existential. I mean, just imagine the perspective from Tel Aviv or Jerusalem to their north, Syria, to their east, Jordan and Iraq, now linked with Egypt, to their south, the mobilized Egyptian army in Sinai. Combined military forces, arrayed under a single Egyptian command structure, poised for what many Arab leaders were publicly declaring would be the final confrontation to eliminate Israel.
That sense of encirclement must have been overwhelming.
Undoubtedly. This alliance definitely amplified Israeli anxieties and their profound sense of isolation. It likely pushed them much closer to feeling that they have no choice but to act decisively and perhaps preemptively to secure their very survival.
So what does this all mean then? The stage was undeniably set. You have this formidable Arab alliance solidified, critical shipping lanes blockaded, Israel feels existentially threatened. In response, they made a strategic decision that, as you said, fundamentally determined the entire course of the war. They struck first.
Precisely. That's how it unfolded. In response to what they perceived as this imminent and existential threat, the mobilization of Arab neighbors, the blockade of Akka, Israel, launched a sudden preemptive air assault. This happened early on the morning of June 5th. The move, codenamed Operation Focus, was all about the element of surprise. The goal was to neutralize the Arab air forces, especially Egypt's, before they could even get off the ground.
And this preemptive nature, that's key, isn't it? There's still debate about whether it's purely defensive or opportunistic.
Absolutely. It raises that important question historians still grapple with. Was this purely a defensive act, undertaken to neutralize what they saw as an unavoidable imminent threat? Or was it perhaps an opportunistic strike, taking advantage of the circumstances created by the Arab buildup? Our sources consistently describe it as preemptive, indicating it was undertaken to neutralize that perceived threat before it could fully materialize and inflict potentially devastating damage on Israel itself.
Okay, so Operation Focus begins on June 5th.
Yeah.
How effective was it?
The initial blow was, well, absolutely critical to Israel's swift victory. Israeli fighter jets flew very low, under the radar, striking Egyptian air bases in multiple coordinated waves. The execution was just devastatingly effective. The Israeli Air Force destroyed more than 90% of Egypt's entire Air Force, and crucially, not in dogfights in the air, but on the tarmac.
90% destroyed on the ground.
Yes. Imagine the scale of that. Hundreds of Egyptian aircraft, their advanced Soviet-supplied MiGs, their bombers just neutralized before they could even take off, caught in their hangars or on the runways. And a similar, though smaller, air assault quickly followed against Syria, effectively incapacitating the Syrian Air Force as well.
That's an astonishing level of success in just the first few hours. What were the immediate consequences of basically wiping out the enemy air forces?
The consequences were immediate and, frankly, catastrophic for the Arab armies, particularly for Egypt. Without any air cover whatsoever, the vast Egyptian army, which had mobilized so heavily in the Sinai, was left completely vulnerable to Israeli ground attack. Their tanks, their infantry columns, their supply lines, all exposed to relentless Israeli airstrikes. They were just unable to defend themselves from the air, so this single decisive action in the opening hours effectively neutralized a massive part of the Arab military threat right from the outset. It paved the way for Israel's ground advances, giving them virtually unchallenged aerial superiority. This advantage would dictate the flow and the incredibly swift outcome of the entire conflict.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Air superiority totally secured in those critical opening hours. The ground offensive was, as we've heard, swift and incredibly decisive. The map of the Middle East was literally about to be redrawn in just a few days. So where exactly was the six-day war fought on the ground?
That's right, the air victory set the stage. The main ground offensives unfolded on three primary fronts. The first, and perhaps largest, was in the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip, facing the now exposed Egyptian forces. The speed and efficiency of the Israeli advance there were truly remarkable. Within just 3 days, the Israelis had achieved an overwhelming victory on the ground. They captured the entire Gaza Strip and all of the Sinai Peninsula, pushing right up to the east bank of the Suez Canal.
3 days to cross the entire Sinai.
Yes, and you have to consider the logistical challenges, the tactical brilliance involved in such a rapid advance across that vast, unforgiving desert territory. The Israeli forces, even though numerically smaller in total, effectively used their complete air superiority to isolate Egyptian units, completely disrupt their communications, destroy their supply lines. It led to widespread chaos and disarray among the Egyptian ranks. This sheer speed of capture really demonstrated the effectiveness of Israel's combined arms approach armor, infantry, and crucially, air power working together, having already crippled the enemy's air capability.
So, while the Sinai front was collapsing so quickly, what was happening on the eastern front? The one with Jordan?
Right, while the Sinai operation was unfolding at lightning speed, an eastern front was also opened up. On June 5th, the very same day, Israel launched its initial air assaults against Egypt. Jordanian forces began shelling West Jerusalem.
Despite Israel's warning to King Hussein?
Yes, despite Israel's explicit warning to King Hussein to keep Jordan out of the fight. They apparently offered him a chance to avoid conflict if he stayed neutral. Jordan's decision to enter the war, well, it was complex, driven partly by pressure from other Arab states, Nasser primarily, and this sense of pan-Arab solidarity, but it quickly backfired on them.
How so?
Their involvement was met with a swift and crushing Israeli counterattack. By June 7th, so just 2 days after the shelling of West Jerusalem began, Israeli forces had driven the Jordanian army completely out of East Jerusalem, including the historically vital Old City, and also out of most of the West Bank.
And the capture of Jerusalem, that must have been hugely significant.
Immensely so. What's fascinating here is how quickly the conflict expanded, despite those warnings, and the enormous religious and historical significance of Jerusalem. The capture of the Old City, home to some of the holiest sites in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the Western Wall, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex. It was a deeply symbolic and emotionally charged moment for everyone involved. Those photos and films, of Israeli paratroopers reaching the Western Wall, they became some of the war's most iconic and enduring images. It profoundly impacted the emotional and political landscape of the entire region, and it cemented a new reality on the ground, one that persists contentiously to this very day.
Okay, so two major fronts decisively won by Israel in just a few days, Sinai Gaza and the West Bank East Jerusalem. What about the third front, up north against Syria?
Right. Following these rapid decisive victories on the Egyptian and Jordanian fronts, the UN Security Council stepped in and called for a ceasefire on June 7th. Israel and Jordan accepted it immediately. Egypt followed suit the very next day on June 8th.
But not Syria.
Syria held out. Instead of accepting the ceasefire, Syrian forces continued to shell Israeli villages down in the Galilee region from their heavily fortified positions up on the Golan Heights. This defiance, combined with the obvious strategic importance of the Golan, its commanding high ground overlooking northern Israel, led to the final major offensive of the war.
Israel went for the Golan Heights.
They did. On June 9th, Israel launched an assault on those heavily fortified Golan Heights. Now, this was not a swift victory like some of the others. The sources emphasize this. The terrain was incredibly difficult, it was heavily mined, and it was defended by well-entrenched Syrian forces. It involved a full day of intense, heavy fighting with significant casualties on both sides. But by the end of that day, June 9th, Israel had captured the Golan Heights from Syrian forces. Syria finally accepted the ceasefire on June 10th, bringing the 6 days of intense conflict officially to an end.
And the capture of the Golan completed the territorial picture.
It did. If you connect this to the bigger picture, the final capture of the Golan Heights completed Israel's massive territorial gains from the war. It defined the new, dramatically altered map of the conflict. And crucially for Israel, it secured strategically vital high ground that provided a critical defensive buffer and an observation point overlooking Syrian territory and northern Israel.
So what does this all mean then? The fighting stops after just 6 days. The dust settles, but the landscape, both the physical ground and the political reality, was just irrevocably altered. The immediate aftermath must have shown a stark contrast in outcomes.
Stark is definitely the right word. The losses for the Arab countries were truly disastrous. It just underscored the overwhelmingly lopsided nature of Israel's victory. Egypt's casualties were staggering the figures very slightly, but most sources say more than 11,000 dead or wounded. Jordan suffered around 6,000 casualties. Syria lost about 1,000.
And Israel's losses.
Much, much lower. Compared with those figures, Israel suffered only around 700 casualties during the entire conflict. That stark imbalance really gives you a clear picture of the military dominance Israel achieved, largely thanks to that initial airstrike, strategic planning, speed, and air superiority throughout. And beyond the tragic human cost, the Arab armies also suffered crippling losses of weaponry and equipment. We're talking thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, aircraft, vast amounts of ammunition either destroyed or captured by the Israelis. This further diminished their military capabilities for years to come.
How did such a rapid, comprehensive, and lopsided defeat affect the morale and the political stability of the Arab nations involved? I mean, this couldn't have just been a military loss. It must have been a profound psychological and political rupture for them.
Exactly. You've hit on a key point. The scale of this military defeat had a deeply demoralizing effect on both the Arab public and their political leadership. All the euphoria and the aggressive rhetoric that preceded the war just evaporated overnight. It was replaced by this profound sense of shock, humiliation, and frankly despair across the Arab world. Egyptian President Nasser, remember the architect of the pre-war escalation, the symbol of Arab unity and strength, he felt the immense weight of this defeat very acutely.
Didn't he offer to resign?
He did. He publicly announced his resignation on June 9th, explicitly taking responsibility for the catastrophic failure. But then something interesting happened. Widespread mass demonstrations immediately erupted across Egypt, huge crowds demanding that he stay in office. It showed the public's deep emotional connection to him. Despite the devastating military failure, he quickly yielded and rescinded his resignation. But that moment really speaks to the profound disappointment and disorientation that riffled across the Arab world. It led to internal political instability in several countries and prompted deep, painful introspection about the future of pan-Arabism and their relationship with Israel.
And on the other side, in Israel.
A complete contrast. In Israel, there was an overwhelming sense of euphoria, immense relief, and powerful national pride. You have to remember, the country had faced what many genuinely perceived as an existential threat. There was widespread talk before the war, especially in Arab media, of Israel being pushed into the sea. So not only had they survived, but they had achieved this absolutely stunning, lightning-fast victory that completely reshaped the region's map. It proved beyond any question at the time that Israel was the region's preeminent military power. This triumph instilled a deep sense of national unity, confidence, almost invincibility, which profoundly affected Israeli society and its self-perception for years afterwards.
Okay, so the immediate aftermath is clear. Devastation and soul-searching on one side, euphoria and newfound confidence on the other. But here's where it gets, I think, really interesting for understanding today's situation. The real legacy of the Six-Day War isn't just about the fighting or even just the immediate aftermath. It's about the profound, irreversible changes it brought to the entire region. This short, intense conflict forever altered the geopolitical landscape. It set the stage for decades of ongoing conflict, yes, but also, perhaps surprisingly, for future peace efforts. It truly was a turning point with ongoing global relevance. So let's dig into that significance. What was the significance of the Six-Day War?
Its significance really cannot be overstated. You're right, it's about the long-term consequences. Israel's decisive victory resulted in these massive territorial acquisitions. We've listed them: the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, the Old City of Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. These captures fundamentally redrew the map of the Middle East. And crucially, the status of these territories subsequently became, and remains today, the major point of contention in the Arab-Israeli conflict.
So it shifted the focus of the conflict.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, these territorial acquisitions fundamentally shifted the core focus. Before 1967, the conflict was often framed primarily around Israel's very right to exist. After 1967, while that question didn't disappear entirely, the conflict became largely centered on the status and future of these newly occupied territories. The debate became about withdrawal, borders, settlements, security, all issues directly tied to the land captured in those 6 days. This became the central axis around which all future peace talks, military engagements, and diplomatic efforts would revolve.
And can you just remind us briefly how the fate of each of those specific areas unfolded in the subsequent years? Our sources mention their different trajectories.
Yes, it's important because they didn't all follow the same path. Let's look at them. The Sinai Peninsula, that vast desert territory captured from Egypt, was eventually returned to Egypt. This happened as part of the landmark Camp David Accords in 1979, signed between Egyptian President Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Begin, brokered by U.S. President Carter.
So that showed land could be returned for peace.
Precisely. It demonstrated that territorial concessions were indeed possible in exchange for peace and full diplomatic recognition, setting a really important precedent. The Golan Heights, however, took a different route. It was formally annexed by Israel in 1981. Its strategic importance, that commanding high ground, really cemented its status in Israeli eyes, though this annexation is not widely recognized internationally.
And Jerusalem. Always contentious.
Extremely. East Jerusalem, including the Old City, with its immense religious significance for Jews, Christians, and Muslims, was also formally annexed by Israel shortly after the war in 1967 itself and declared part of its unified capital. But its status remains probably the most highly contentious issue of all, a constant flashpoint in international diplomacy, an essential obstacle to any final peace agreement. And finally, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. These two territories were placed under Israeli military occupation following the war.
And they became central to the Palestinian issue.
Absolutely. These two territories became the core geographical areas for the Palestinian aspiration for an independent state. Their status, the occupation, the growth of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, these continue to be the core, unresolved issues in peace negotiations. They directly affect the lives of millions of Palestinians and shape the ongoing struggle for self-determination. And that leads to another crucial point. What's fascinating here, and often overlooked, is how the Six-Day War, which on the surface was a conflict between states, Israel versus Egypt, Jordan, Syria, directly and dramatically impacted the lives of a huge Palestinian population. It marked the start of a new, incredibly complex phase in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict specifically.
How so?
Well, firstly, the war created hundreds of thousands of new Palestinian refugees, people fleeing the West Bank and Gaza, adding to the already existing Palestinian refugee population from the 1948 war. These new refugees, often ending up in crowded camps in neighboring Arab countries like Jordan, faced immense humanitarian challenges and further swelled the Palestinian diaspora. Secondly, and perhaps even more consequentially, the war brought more than 1 million Palestinians who lived in the West Bank and Gaza Strip under direct Israeli military rule, under occupation.
So from Jordanian or Egyptian administration to Israeli military administration?
Exactly. This shift was monumental. It fundamentally changed the dynamics of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It made the plight of the Palestinian people, their lack of self-governance, their daily lives under military administration, their aspirations for an independent state, a central, undeniable issue on the international stage in a way it perhaps hadn't been before. Their humanitarian concerns and their political aspirations for self-determination became inextricably linked to the outcomes of this war and the future status of those occupied territories.
Okay, so massive territorial shifts, a new phase for the Palestinian issue. What about the diplomatic fallout? You mentioned the UN Security Council earlier. One of the most enduring legacies seems to be UN Resolution 242.
Yes, absolutely critical. Months after the fighting stopped, in November 1967, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 242. In essence, it called for Israel's withdrawal from territories it had captured in the war in exchange for lasting peace with its neighbors, based on secure and recognized boundaries.
But there was some ambiguity in the wording, wasn't there? That became quite important.
Hugely important. You've hit on a crucial point that shaped decades of diplomacy. Resolution 242 became the foundational basis for almost all subsequent diplomatic efforts between Israel and its Arab neighbors. It laid the groundwork for that famous formula, land for peace. But the ambiguity lies in its English phrasing. It called for withdrawal from territories occupied in the recent conflict rather than from all the territories occupied.
A small difference with massive implications.
Massive. This seemingly small linguistic difference allowed for very different interpretations. Arab states, and later the Palestinians, generally insisted it meant complete withdrawal from all territories captured in '67. Israel, on the other hand, argued it meant withdrawal from some territories, sufficient to provide secure and recognized borders, but not necessarily all of them. Despite this fundamental ambiguity, the resolution's core principle that land could be exchanged for peace and security proved remarkably resilient.
It was the basis for Camp David, you said.
Yes, that land for peace formula explicitly underpinned the historic Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt. Egypt got the entire Sinai Peninsula back, and Israel got a full, lasting peace treaty with the largest Arab nation. It also became, and remains, the conceptual basis for the ongoing international push for a two-state solution with the Palestinians. The idea being the establishment of an independent Palestinian state roughly within the 1967 borders, with potential land swaps, living alongside Israel in peace and security. So these elements, withdrawal, secure borders, recognition, land for peace, all stemming from Resolution 242, continue to be absolutely central to regional and international discussions about peace and stability in the Middle East. It just demonstrates how profoundly significant those 6 short days in 1967 were in shaping the political discourse and the diplomatic framework for decades, right up to today.
So what does this all mean for us today, trying to understand the region? It seems clear that from a tense pre-war climate, one fueled by cross-border aggression and even, as you highlighted, critical misinformation.
Right, the Soviet reports.
Exactly. To a lightning-fast conflict characterized by that decisive preemptive strike, and then resulting in a deeply, fundamentally altered geopolitical map. The Six-Day War really stands as the stark testament to how quickly history can be rewritten, how rapidly the ground can shift beneath our feet. Hopefully, listening to this, you've gained a clear understanding of the profound shifts that occurred in just those 6 days back in 1967, and crucially, how those moments continue to shape the ongoing push for peace and stability, or the lack thereof in the Middle East, directly influencing current events and future aspirations.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture one last time, the Six-Day War wasn't merely a military victory for one side and a defeat for the others. It fundamentally changed the entire narrative. It changed the terms of engagement for decades to come. It created new, deeply entrenched realities on the ground. The occupation, the settlements, the changed borders, the heightened Palestinian national consciousness realities that we are still grappling with intensely today. It really challenges us, I think, to consider how do the unresolved issues born from one brief, albeit decisive conflict continue to ripple through generations? How do they keep influencing borders, national aspirations, identities, and that enduring, incredibly complex pursued peace in a region so profoundly shaped by such a short but intensely impactful war? The seeds of so many of today's challenges were really sown in those 6 days.